Saving more for the economy should be better, isn't it? And having more resources can make a country richer, right? Wrong. And today we'll show you that how these ideas can actually backfire. Hello everyone, welcome to Concept Battles, where we settle the most confusing of the topics once and for all. And today's fight is between Paradox of Thrift and Paradox of Plenty. Now the first concept is the paradox of thrift. Now this is a classic Keynesian concept where it states that individuals, when they save more, isn't it good, right? But when these individual savings are aggregated together, they're bad for the economy. And how are they bad? If people start to save more, means if savings increase, people will start consuming less. The consumption falls. When consumption falls, the aggregate demand falls. And when aggregate demand falls, the producers are left with absolutely no, incentive to produce more. So therefore, production falls. When production falls, then as a result, there is layoff of workers, isn't it? When workers are laid off, then income falls. And when income falls, the savings also fall. So where we started off with increased savings, ultimate result is that our savings have reduced at the national level simply because of individual savings. On the other hand, the concept of paradox of plenty, it states that the countries with natural resources in abundance, right, they tend to grow slower. Now, what are the reasons for it? Because logically, when we think that if we have more of natural resources, we're bound to grow richer, isn't it? But no, that's not actually true. What happens is, why does this concept take place? Because of lack of diversification. Because the countries, the economy's primary focus becomes the resource abundant sectors, and it tends to ignore other sectors. Another reason is the corruption and mismanagement. Now, abundant resources basically can lead to intense competition between the groups, and this competition can actually fuel political corruption and mismanagement. And third is the very important concept, that is the Dutch disease. Dutch disease means that because of this natural resource, the local currency actually strengthens. And when there is an appreciation of currency that takes place, the currency's exchange rate value is actually improving, then what happens? The other sectors, what are they doing? They're losing their competitiveness, right? For example, the classic example of oil, right? Countries like Venezuela, countries like Nigeria, they're still not very much developed, though they have abundant oil resources, but still they are not developed because of this concept of paradox of plenty, right? So coming back to this Dutch disease, that when there is an appreciation of currency that takes place, so the other sectors which are not dealing with this specific resource, they are losing their competitiveness in the global market, right? Because now their products are expensive as compared to other substitutes that are available, right? And as a result, their demand falls, right? And that is what Dutch disease is. That, okay, logically the currency is appreciating, but then it is also leading to the worsening of economic conditions of the other sectors, right? So when we ask this question, that why even after having abundant natural resources, these countries fail to develop, that's simply because other sectors are neglected, right? Other sectors, social sectors especially, for example, education, for example, health, these sectors are not paid much attention, right? And the primary focus is simply on the resource intensive sector. And because of this neglect, the development takes a backseat, right? And then second reason is the rent seeking behavior, because the elite groups, they are trying to seek maximum profit out of these resources, right? They're trying to control these resources just to maintain or to enhance the profitability of their enterprises, right? And the third is the volatility. Now, because the country becomes too much, dependent on this specific resource intensive sector, so any harm, any downfall in this sector will impact the entire economy as a whole, right? Because we are just focusing on one sector and we are ignoring all the other sectors completely. The lack of diversification, right? And this makes the economy very much volatile. Okay, so coming back to the comparison between these two topics, the paradox of thrift and paradox of plenty, first we need to understand is the paradox of thrift is a demand side issue where due to fall in savings there is a fall in aggregate demand that is taking place. On the other hand, the paradox of plenty is focusing on the supply side, the resource side issue, right? So paradox of thrift is demand side theory, whereas paradox of plenty is a supply side theory. Then second is the saving behavior. Paradox of thrift basically targets the saving behavior, that okay, at an individual level savings seems to be a good idea, but at the national level, if all of us start saving more, then that will actually worsen the economic condition of the country. Okay. On the other hand, the natural resources is the main idea of paradox of plenty. Because of abundant natural resources, we are just focusing on one side of the economy and ignoring the rest of it. And what are the final outcome of it? The paradox of thrift ultimately, though started off with an increased saving, ultimate result would be a fall in national savings and income, right? On the other hand, the ultimate outcome of paradox of plenty would be slower growth. So even if, just think of, there are Indian states as well which are resource abundant, resource rich, and still they are considered one of the poorest states in India. Just think of it, right? Coming to a question, let's try to solve this, that which of the following is correctly matched. First is the paradox of thrift. Excess savings lead to higher growth. No, that is not what paradox of thrift is saying. Then paradox of plenty means resource rich countries grow faster. Absolutely no. Paradox of thrift leads to fall in aggregate demand. Yes, that is true. And paradox of plenty leads to higher diversification. No, rather it leads to lower diversification. So the correct answer is option C here. So just to remember that where your paradox of thrift is focusing on savings aspect and is saying that it will lead to lower demand, paradox of thrift, increased savings will lead to bad demand, the paradox of plenty talks about mismanagement of resources, that we are unable to manage the resource part that we are endowed with, and simply because of this mismanagement we are not able to grow faster, right? So paradox of thrift states that savings hurt the economy. The higher the savings, they will hurt the economy. Whereas paradox of plenty states that resources actually hurt growth. Abundance of it hurts development and growth, right? So I hope the difference between paradox of thrift and paradox of plenty became clearer after this video. We'll come back again with another battle between the two concepts. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.